for seasonally flooded depressions called vernal pools. As winter rains fill the pools, freshwater invertebrates, crustaceans, and amphibians emerge. In spring, flowering plants produce the brightly colored concentric rings of flowers. Jamie Marty is an ecologist with the Nature Conservancy, and she's interested in how cattle impact these important pools.
Well, I think one of the things that fascinates me about these pools is the fact that a lot of the species, particularly the invertebrate species that occur in the pools, are still unknown to science. I mean, so we know most of the plants by now, but we still don't have names, scientific names for a lot of the crustacean species. They're just still understudied systems, and so we would lose that. We would lose things that we didn't even know existed, essentially, which I think is a huge loss. So let's walk over to this plot that hasn't been grazed for 7 years. I will. Okay. So you can see what happens when you don't graze this habitat for a number of years. You start to see a lot more grass growing in and not a whole lot of forbs. And what happens with the removal of cattle grazing is the grasses really start to dominate because cattle prefer feeding on grasses over the forbs. So why don't we go check out a pool that's been grazed?
Okay.
So I think historically the grazing pattern prior to cattle being introduced would have been tule elk and pronghorn sort of sweeping through the grassland. So a lot of these plants have evolved the ability to tolerate grazing. The protection of these habitats doesn't end with the placement of a conservation easement on the land or protection by a local conservancy. The management of the property is equally critical, and as we've seen with the grazing studies, if you remove cattle grazing from these habitats that have been grazed for over a century, the results are not positive for native biodiversity.
Over time, the frequency, density, and composition of plants tend to shift as competitive struggles unfold between species. Their struggles interact with the energy, nutrient, and hydrological processes. We see that grazing tolerance is just one arena for a species to claim advantage of another. Water competition, nutrient capture, stealing sunlight, chemical warfare, and many other battles are being fought simultaneously, and only when considered as a whole does the final seem less than random.